And this has been a really important for us, because in competitive consolidations, we found that those people get hired right away. You've already got a factory, right? You've got demand, right? You're closing that factory. They're either moving or you're hiring new people right away into those businesses. So having that business climate has really helped us on competitive consolidations. Now, that's not to say that the factories haven't closed in Indiana, but they have not. We've not been given the opportunity to compete in several of those, and so of the ones we have competed in, we've won 70 of 71 of those transactions. So I'll come back to this best supporting actor in a little bit. I talked a little bit about IEDC being a transactional organization. The Indiana Economic Development Corporation does deals, and that's about it. With the exception of a fund called the 21 Fund that's designed for entrepreneurship in our state, which is a state venture capital fund, all we do all day is transactions. And that single purpose has really focused my staff of a whopping 65 on doing transactions. Now, when we need support from other agencies, and this is where the culture of the governor comes in, and the culture that the governor has created. When the governor, it's very clear in all of our cabinet meetings, and the cabinet meets every other Monday, and we talk about jobs and we talk about deals. That's the first thing on the agenda at every meeting. But it's very clear from the governor that the #1 job you have, if I call, is to do whatever I ask. And it's not Mitch Roob calling, it's the Secretary of Commerce calling, because the governor chairs the board that I sit on. So we are very responsive and very fast on doing those transactions. When I call the Department of the guy who runs the Department of Transportation, he stops what he's doing, takes my call, and executes against it, if at all possible. Similarly, at our environmental regulation agency, similarly at our Board of Pharmacy Review. You wouldn't think the Board of Pharmacy Review would be important, would you? Who thinks the Board of Pharmacy Review would be important in economic development? Some of you who have done this transaction, I'll tell you a little story on why that's so important. And why it's important to have all parts of government pulling consistently in the same way. That we've competed against the state of Kentucky for a company called Medco. Medco moved 1,200 jobs to Indiana, each paying about $100,000 a year. They were told by the folks in Kentucky, where they were planning on moving, that it would take 65 days for them to get a permit. 65 days to get a permit. We had it to them in 5. That speed, the speed at which we have implemented government, right, is really what differentiates our ability to do transactions more than anything else in talking to site selection consultants. The focus and the speed that we're able to bring differentiates us from others. So how have we done? Private sector job projections this year to date, we're at about 18,000 year to date. We'll probably get to about 23 or 24,000 if the stuff in our pipeline comes on as we would expect. Investment, we've seen investment increase substantially this year over last, though not nearly what we'd like it to be. We have seen major capital investment, by the way, continue to sit on the sidelines. So our really, really, really big deals, right? The $750 million deal, the $500 million deal, the $1.2 billion deal have been sitting on our pipeline since early this year, and they really haven't materially moved. And those are concerns, candidly, about whether or not investing in this country is a good economic opportunity for the shareholders, or whether investing in other locations around the globe is more advantageous. Competitive projects, we've seen our competitive projects so far this year. Our competitive projects, we've done about 150 so far this year. Year to date, that number probably will end up probably in the 180 to 190 range by the end of the year. We're And we saw a really fast run up early this year. January, February, March, April, early May, we were doing great. And about May 15th, it ran into jello, right? And really from the whole summer until after Labor Day was slow. But we've seen a big pickup in the last 5 or 6 weeks. We've seen a lot of pickups. We did 9 transactions last week. So we're hopeful that trend now will continue at least through early December when stuff generally slows down a bit. Let's talk a little bit about incentives in terms of how we design our incentives and how you guys may or may not design your incentives. We always hear from companies about, I'll tell you a Wisconsin story. The one deal that we did compete with you on was last year. And we have a project called EDGE, which basically is a way of returning people's employers' income taxes back to the company, right? You guys have a similar program up here. Ours is refundable. I don't know whether yours is refundable or not. But the company in question came to us and they said, well, the people in Wisconsin, they've offered twice the amount in EDGE that you're going to offer. And we said, well, that's right, they have, because their tax rate is twice what our tax rate is. So they can offer twice the tax refund because they will tax you twice as much. And so one of the things we've tried to do, and one of the things that we're measured on, is our cost per job, right? What do we spend in tax dollars to attract a job? Almost all of those tax dollars on a per job basis only go out the door after the job is created, right? Only after the job is created are those dollars forward. On very, very rare circumstances, I think about 6 times during the course of the Daniels administration, have we provided upfront cash to companies to get them to move or expand in Indiana. And we've gotten a lot more pressure in the last year to do that, and we have resisted that temptation mightily. And our tax climate allows us to do that. Many site consultants tell us that they normalize our incentive package for our tax structure, and cost structure in our state. One of our major goals in Indiana is to increase Hoosier incomes. In fact, this is the governor says this is the single organizing principle of the administration, is to increase the average wage for Hoosiers. And the jobs that we have managed to attract are higher paying than the average Hoosier wage, though quite candidly, the average Hoosier still makes less than the average Badger does. And this is an issue for us. Both a good issue in competing for folks because it costs less the cost of living is less in Indiana than it is here. The cost of employing someone is less than here, but candidly, their incomes are also lower, and that's a problem for us in our state, and something that we have some long-term issues on that other parts of state government, not my part of state government, are working on. I've talked briefly about consolidations. I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing where they came from. I'm not sure how many of you can see where these jobs came from, but only 2 of those 70 came from Wisconsin. We rarely compete against Wisconsin. In part, I was kidding about the tax issues. That's in part true, but we're perceived differently and in a different geographical place than Wisconsin is. So we don't really compete very often against you. Obviously, we compete against Michigan, 9 wins, 7 from Ohio, 9 from Kentucky, and 6 from Illinois, of folks who have chosen to consolidate into Indiana, and several from around the world as well. Let me close with this, and this is something that's outside of my role at IEDC on a daily basis, but something that we've observed in Indiana, and I'm curious whether you've observed this here in Wisconsin as well. When we are competing globally, what we hear is that Americans, whether they're living in Indiana, in Illinois, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, do not have world-class quantitative skills. We do not have world-class quantitative skills, and those world-class quantitative skills are necessary for competing effectively in the 21st century.